Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is episode 7 of the KMG Show. First up, Canada held hostage. What is it, day 20 now? Our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, aka Princess Rockstar, says that the actions at Mohawk blockade are extremely concerning. That's the kind of bold leadership we expect from Mr. Trudeau. There are reports that the Mohawk blockade, or the Mohawks involved in the blockade, have weapons, serious weapons, including AK-47s. I see that our political class is going nuts about this accusation, but they really should try to keep up with the news. It was testimony before the U.S. Senate some years ago claimed that guns such as AK-47s were being brought into America, through America, to Mohawk reserves in Canada and in New York via the port of Long Beach, California, which was then controlled by the Chinese billionaire Li Ka-shing. So, what else do we have? What's wet and hereditary chiefs could meet federal minister as soon as Thursday. Jason Kenney, Premier of Alberta, warns cancelled energy projects stand in the way of Indigenous prosperity. So, we have a situation in Canada which has been going on for about 3 weeks where anarchy has broken out, where a group of protesters, various groups of protesters across the country, some of whom are native, some of whom are non-native, some of whom I suppose are environmentalists, have decided to attempt to bring Canada to a halt through various kinds of blockades. I would suggest, or have suggested recently, that the reason that Justin Trudeau has resorted to talking about things being extremely concerning is that he, or rather the people around him, the people who pull his strings, have come to the realization that this is not good for him and his party politically. Being seen to have lost control of the country while it descends into anarchy is never a good political look. But the media is here to tell us who the real villains in this are. Wait for it, far-right vigilantes. A woman called Shannon Gormley, who is been based in the Middle East, according to her website, which is a strange place to report on Canada, and who has been funded by the Aga Khan Foundation, and that's totally legit. She has this to say: Canada should prepare to confront a surge in white supremacist vigilantes. That there will, in fact, be a surge isn't certain. It's even less certain the vigilantes would be violent. But as Canada copes with a rail system shut down by Indigenous protesters, it faces a heightened risk that a band of racist bully boys will designate themselves the nation's hall monitors of vital infrastructure. You see what she did there? Hall monitors. You see, being concerned about law and order, or believing that law and order is vital to any functioning society, makes you a hall monitor. What a petty, what a trivial concern. Oh, and this is one of the many stories in which academics are trotted out to supposedly prove political points, to make QEDs for op-ed writers. That's the most reasonable conclusion to draw, at least, from the findings of an international team of academics. Not just one academic, not two, not three, not four, a team of academics, including University of Oslo scholar Tore Bjorgo, who identifies several conditions that have encouraged grown men. You see, again, grown men. What a petty concern law and order is. Grown men to run around Europe and North America in ill-fitting camo pants hunting migrants. Is that going on in Canada? Is there a plague of men in ill-fitting camel pants hunting migrants. I haven't seen it. Perhaps Shannon Gormley can give us more information. The researchers identified these conditions in vigilantism against migrants and minorities last year, with the blockades already exciting violent fantasies on far-right online chat boards. It seems wise to consider how they might apply to Canada now. And the New York Times is on this case as well. The message is that nationalism, or perhaps even patriotism, equals racism, equals white supremacy. Does the country face a specific shocking event? Oh, well, let's see. Passenger service paralyzed, ports flooded with stranded container ships, 1,500 rail workers laid off, critical propane shortages, warnings of a recession. Is the crisis associated with a marginalized group perceived as threatening? Not only are Canada's Indigenous people marginalized, and not only are they perceived as threatening by many in the same white majority that marginalizes them, I should point out that Shannon Gormley is very white indeed. Their very existence as a marginalized minority poses a threat to what it is white supremacists imagine the nation to be. You see, if you're in favor of law and order and against anarchy, that makes you a white supremacist. These people like Shannon Gormley should be very careful in their use of language, but of course, they're not going to be. Because if they keep pushing this line that support for law and order equals white supremacism, then the very charge of white supremacism will lose its sting. Oh, she concludes this paragraph, onward, make-believe soldiers. You see, it's so petty. It's so pitiful. Why are so many people upset about what's going on? Does the country trust authorities to protect people? Where Canadians don't trust their institutions, they may trust the guy in the antler logo sweatshirt prophesying total system failure. Does the country have permissive legislation for armed defense? With its restrictive gun laws, Canada has blunted the risk of marauding gangs of well-armed thugs. That's of limited comfort, though. White supremacists have found ways to shoot up countries with similarly restrictive gun laws, and most vigilantes don't shoot people anyway. Well, that's a relief. Thugs don't need to commit violence. They have only to threaten it. Does this country have a historical tradition of militias and vigilantism? The country's history of militias and vigilantism being less storied than America's history of the Ku Klux Klan or Central Europe's history of fascist militias, a young nationalist imagination is less easily sparked. However, that didn't prevent the FLQ from terrorizing Quebec several decades ago. This is a consistent theme in Canadian political writing, which is America envy. One saw this in the 1960s. America has a race problem. Why doesn't Canada have a race problem? And then about 20 years later, some blacks torched some cars on Yonge Street in Toronto, and the elite was happy because finally Canada had a race problem. Does the country have a base of support for far-right vigilantism among the public and politicians? Well, they will always find support from far-right media. But while every rebel mouth may complain of being silenced, their real problem, and Canada's advantage, is they're also cartoonishly hideous in their views, comportment, and every other conceivable quality that no one of consequence can bother to listen to them. Then why do we get several hundred words from Shannon Gormley on what a serious problem this is? This is more cognitive dissonance on the left. On the one hand, our enemies are a bunch of clowns. On the other hand, oh my God, white supremacists are about to take over. They're just tacky carnival barkers who exchange whatever dubious degree of dignity they once unconvincingly pantomimed for ticket sales, then they discovered ticket sales were low. More dangerous than the fringe clowns are the serious politicians who very occasionally try to get in on the joke, such as Peter MacKay, who called the act of clearing a barricade in Edmonton an act of good citizenship. Do the police turn a blind eye to far-right vigilantism or even accept and support it? Sometimes it's difficult to imagine Canadian police calling in reinforcements of neo-Nazis. Yeah, that really is difficult to imagine. And yet, when the soldiers of Odin recently became active in BC, some residents and anti-hate groups criticized the local RCMP for signaling that the group is not a concern for public safety. As well, Canadian law enforcement is accused of targeting people of color often enough. White supremacists may assume they'll have license to do the same. See, we have thousands of people, currently breaking the law in this country, but that's not violent. Common assault, conspiracy, etc. No, that's not really a problem. The problem is that the white supremacists out there, and this is really the elite is going to the mat on this. That anyone, as I say, anyone who supports law and order is a Nazi, fascist, a white supremacist. Canada's media just can't die quick enough. For my American friends who lament the state of their media, well, imagine the American media where it's all CNN all the time or all MSNBC all the time. That's pretty much what the Canadian media is. So we have another piece from Maclean's, and Maclean's has gone really woke. Maclean's is a magazine. I suppose it's the oldest magazine in Canada. It was shuffled off by Rogers Media a few months ago, presumably because no one buys it. The way that Maclean's got to be so read was essentially it was sold for almost nothing through telemarketing. I don't know whether they manage to do that anymore. It used to be found in every doctor's and dentist office. But here we have in Maclean's Heidi Matthews, who is assistant professor at Osgoode Hall Law School at York University, where she co-directs the Nathanson Center on Transactional Human Rights, Crime, and Security. Her research focuses on international criminal law and sexuality. Very intersectional. I should explain that Osgoode Hall's position in Canadian elite life. Well, imagine if you took Harvard and Yale and, say, Georgetown and put them together, and there was one place. That's pretty much the place of Osgoode Hall. Osgoode Hall is la creme de la creme of the Canadian legal establishment. She begins, in recent days, public discourse around blockades and solidarity with the efforts of Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs to halt the construction of the Coastal GasLink pipeline on the nation's traditional territory turned particularly ugly. In attempts to whip up public hostility and force an end to the protests, both official opposition leader Andrew Scheer and Peter MacKay, who is vying to replace him, turned to civil rights era racist stereotypes. Invoking the specter of the outside agitator, they sought to delegitimize the involvement of non-Indigenous protesters in order to break the bonds of activist solidarity that can be so crucial in creating the political will to address the conditions of inequality and oppression that underlie civil unrest. You know, I was talking a minute ago about American envy. Civil rights area racist stereotypes. Canada did not go through anything like America's civil rights movement, for the simple reason that there were no blacks to speak of in Canada in the 1960s. There are 1.2 million black people in Canada now, but no, we didn't, have all that civil rights problem. We have Black History Month in Canada, despite the fact that there is no Black history to speak of in my country. This Heidi continues, the figure of the rabble-rouser who penetrates the boundaries of local communities to instigate unrest is, of course, far from new. The outside agitator was central to the race and red-baiting rhetoric deployed against civil rights protesters during the 1960s. During that time, conservatives spread the theory that small groups of criminals, who included both white activists, many of whom were Jewish, and deviant blacks, infiltrated African American communities in both the North and the South in order to foment unrest. Again, oh, she quotes someone from the West Virginia State Bar Association. What does that have to do with Canada? And then she quotes the National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders. Again, nothing at all to do with Canada. And so apparently no outside agitators were involved. Despite the fact that the freedom marches in the South were led and directed by people from the North. I suppose it depends on what you consider to be outside. Let's see, the racist trope of the outside agitator persists. Gotta love that word, trope. In the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, white vigilantes justified their violence against black storm victims on the basis that they invaded neighborhoods for criminal purposes. And in 2014, police officials and politicians alike wrongly placed responsibility for unrest in Ferguson, Missouri at the feet of outside agitators. You mean like those outside agitators that were paid by George Soros to show up and protest every day? Oh, now this pernicious discourse, as Heidi puts it, has been brought to Canada. To be sure, the American history of slavery, Jim Crow, and the contemporary legacy of anti-black racism are distinct from Canada's history. Yes, and its ongoing race-based genocide of Indigenous people. And she talks about Selma, Alabama, and such like. And conservative calls to enforce the rule of law and shut down the Wet'suwet'en and Solidarity railway blockades are part of a cross-border attempt by extractive industries to restrict freedom of expression and the right to protest. That's richly amusing coming from a woman who's a law professor in a country where she knows very well that our very own Supreme Court has ruled that there is no free speech. To repeat, and I will repeat it again because this is very important, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled that truth itself, is not a defense to accusations of hate speech. So as another prominent elitist writer put it in Policy Options last week, which I talked about on this stream last week, what does this come down to? Canada is illegal. Canada is not a real country because it was formed illegally, and it doesn't deserve to exist. Here's her final paragraph. As Pam Palmater notes, the blockades are about more than pipelines. They are about bringing attention to the ways in which Canada criminalizes Indigenous people for peacefully living, asserting and defending our sovereignty over our lands, which apparently is 100% of Canada. In other words, they are about disrupting the spatial ordering. Wow, they love this word space and its derivations of the Canadian state that has been designed to tolerate various forms of Indigenous jurisdiction and self-governance at the expense of national self-determination and sovereignty. If reconciliation is to mean anything at all, it must begin with settler Canadians, what Martin Luther King Jr. calls the white moderate understanding this fact. You see, we're just settlers. You know, this isn't a real country. There is no law. All law, the white man's law, is racist and therefore illegal. And it's time for everyone to get on board with this idea. Now, as I said on Twitter, if Heidi feels so strongly against settler Canadians, she should leave. This is the test. Anything else is rank hypocrisy. Elizabeth May, who is retiring as the leader of the Green Party, has talked about this as well, that we have to, unlearn our settler culture. We really need to find a way to roll back 150 years. Elizabeth May, amusingly enough, is an immigrant to Canada from the United States. She came here at the age of 17. If she really believes that her position in this country is illegal, then she should go back to her native country. No, but there is money to be made and power to be accumulated via this rent seeking. Being a quisling is a well paid occupation in my country. So that's enough for Canada for now. Let's talk next about the coronavirus. Uh, let's see. Mike Bloomberg targets Trump's reckless CDC cuts in new coronavirus attack ad. An ad called Pandemic asserts that the U.S. was not prepared for the coronavirus because of President Trump's budget cuts at the Centers for Disease Control, among others. The 30-second spot, the latest aired by the former mayor, who has spent millions of dollars on his own money on campaign ads, will run nationally on cable, broadcast, and digital platforms. Trump is putting American lives at risk every day, ignoring science, claiming the virus will miraculously disappear by April, and relying on warm weather to end the spread of the virus. It is clearer than ever that the country needs a leader with real experience managing a crisis. In the aftermath of 9/11, he studied. Wait a minute, was Mike Bloomberg mayor of New York at the time of 9/11? I thought Rudy Giuliani was the mayor of New York. I see we're just into clickbait territory here. This is from the New York Post. CDC warns men about facial hair dangers as coronavirus spreads. This is not a joke. And there is a graph here with dozens of male faces with various types of facial hair. The story says, in all seriousness, men may need to hack off their mutton chops, void their Van Dykes, or pluck their ducktails if they plan on using a respirator, according to information from the CDC about how facial hair can interact with the devices. A graphic released by the agency shows the fashionable facial hair wearer, which styles will conflict with potentially life-saving respirators as the U.S. braces for the quickly spreading coronavirus to emerge stateside. Handlebar, walrus, and Zorro mustaches are fine, but the CDC says folks may need to lose their Fu Manchus, Dalis, and Englishes because they could prevent respirators from making a seal on wearers' faces. And while a clean-shaven face is okay, stubble could cause trouble. Oh, God. This is just the smirk emanating from this fellow's style. What's his name? Daniel Cassidy is just unbearable. But I mean, the good news could be is that the hipster beard look, the 3-day stubble look, well, maybe they will disappear. I read once that the reason that beards, which were very popular, kind of de rigueur amongst late Victorian and Edwardian men in England, why they disappeared was that it became common when they stepped out on the streets bearing their facial hair, that boys would chant at them, "Beaver, beaver, beaver." And so apparently that's the reason why beards became unfashionable. Beards were very unfashionable when I was a young man, and any person who went out in public with, a day's worth of stubble, 2 days, 3 days, or whatever, would have been, I don't know, thought to, suffering from a hangover or something, or to be a disreputable or even dangerous person. But this is one of the many ways in which coronavirus is shaking everything up. Shaking up the entertainment industry. Bob Iger mysteriously disappeared. A whole bunch of people at the top of several of America's biggest companies have mysteriously quit in recent weeks. And it appears that diversity in the movie industry could suffer as a result. And, that would likely be the worst possible result from coronavirus. Here's a story from The Hollywood Reporter. Inside Disney's bold $200 million gamble on Mulan. The stakes couldn't be higher. The profile remake with an all-Asian cast, a PG-13 rating, and a politically charged star was always going to pose major risks. Then the coronavirus upended its entire release plan. You know, if a company like Disney just can't be able to do what it wants, I mean, what is the world coming to? There should be a law against this. Let's see, Liu Yifei, star of Disney's live-action remake of Mulan, lives in Beijing, but she is originally from Wuhan, epicenter of the coronavirus. In January, the 32-year-old actress left China for Los Angeles to begin press for the film, weeks before the virus's outbreak, which has now infected more than 77,000 people, killed more than 2,500, and wreaked havoc in her home country. She says that she doesn't have any family or close friends personally affected by the disease. She left Wuhan when she was 10, but the epidemic has added an impossible-to-foresee variable to her film's March 27th worldwide release. Liu pauses when asked about the outbreak. It's really heavy for me to even think about it. She says, I didn't know that people still talked like that. People are doing the right thing. They're being careful for themselves and others. I'm so touched, actually, to see how they haven't been out for weeks. I'm really hoping for a miracle and that this will just be over soon. In China, Liu is a household name, nicknamed Fairy Sister for her elegance and beauty. Modeling since age 8, she broke out in the 2003 Chinese TV series Demigods and Semi-Devils, a commercial hit in China, and the highest-rated Chinese drama in Taiwan at the time, and hasn't stopped working in film and TV since, earning fashion partnerships with Adidas, Shiseido, and Armani along the way. I must confess, I saw the original animated version of Mulan. I saw it with my children, and it was one of the very few movies I actually fell asleep during. That's how boring I found it. $200 million gamble. Is that how much it cost to film? Or is it the total cost? Because if that's how much it just cost to film, we're looking at this movie having to make pretty much, $1 billion just to break even. I'm really looking forward to this Hollywood system being busted because it's only going to take, a few flops for Hollywood to reconsider its strategy that every movie must make $1 billion, otherwise we're not going to bother making it. In the old Hollywood, they used to make a lot of movies. There's not very many movies made anymore, and the idea is that some of them would be smashes, some of them would be flops, most of them would be somewhere in the middle. As long as we make money, well, we're happy with that. No, this system didn't generate enough money. So now it's all about the kids, and it's all about repeat viewing, and it's all about the merch that can be sold. The fact that the same handful of movies keep being remade over and over again is of no interest to Hollywood. It's just all about the money, but I'm really looking forward to this movie flopping in a big way. So there was another Democratic debate last night, and the theme of which apparently was to stop Bernie. He's a communist, apparently. Is this a shock to people? I mean, what sort of person honeymoons in the Soviet Union? And he's said very nice things about Castro's Cuba. Apparently, it's just the acme of educational achievement and healthcare as well. At Castro, yeah, okay. I mean, you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs, but Bernie loves Castro. None of this is a surprise. Bernie has been on the American political stage for decades, but the media is now pretending that it doesn't know about his political views or about erotica that he wrote decades ago. But I have to say that the highlight of yesterday's debate for me was Joe Biden. On the one hand, one feels very sorry for Joe Biden because he's clearly senile. that he is an embarrassment to himself and to his family, and yet he just keeps going on. Joe Biden has run for president 3 times. He has never won a primary or a caucus, not one. But supposedly, he's still the best bet to win South Carolina, apparently because black people love Joe Biden. Maybe it was the corn pop story. Biden claims firearms have killed more than half the U.S. population since 2007. Yeah. He actually said that 150 million Americans in recent years had been killed by guns. So since 2007, in the last 13 years, 150 million people. Now, of course, this is the same Joe Biden who made a heartfelt plea. Look me over again. I'm still running. I'm still here. I'm running for the United States Senate. He said that. As to where this 150 million figure came from, it's really hard to imagine. Did he mean to say 15 million or 1.5 million? But the best part is, no one said, "What, are you out of your mind? You're not taking your meds? Why are you in this race? You're a buffoon." 150 million? Maybe the Democratic Party talks so much about the scourge of guns, which apparently have moral agency, because it's not Americans killing each other. It's these darn guns who are just, insinuate themselves into people's hands, people's arms, and then start blowing other people away. But no one else jumped on this. And the debate, it's difficult, I suppose, to have so many people on the stage, but the complaint was that the debate was out of control. This is from The Hill. Moderators come under criticism online over a contentious debate. The CBS News moderators came under fire on social media Tuesday. As I keep saying, everything comes under fire on social media. This is a lazy way of reporting stories. So who's top off the mark? Meghan McCain. Yes, that universally respected woman from The View. And who's next? Mika Brzezinski from MSNBC. Oh, and then The Daily Show tweeted something, and Donna Brazile tweeted something, and she's apparently still a respected figure despite her role in rigging the 2016 debate nomination against Bernie Sanders. I just saw a bunch of clips with a bunch of adults waving their arms. It's like, teacher, 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 call on me. Former Vice President Joe Biden, in particular, spoke over moderators attempting to cut him off on several occasions, insisting, "I am not out of time. You spoke over time, and I'm going to talk." And later asking, "Can we just speak up when we want to? Is that the idea?" The moderators were Nora McDonald and Gayle King. Gayle King, who is Oprah's girlfriend. And apparently, because of that fact, she vaults to the top of respected media personalities. So let's get a sober view of this from the New York Times. Michelle Cottle, who is a member of the editorial board, says, "Cheer up, Democrats. In the midst of Tuesday's brawl of a debate, they were illuminating, even hopeful moments." So I searched the story. Was there a mention of Joe Biden saying that 150 million Americans have been killed by guns since 2007? No. No, there weren't. There was not. Now, why would this be omitted? Well, I have to assume that the media, the elite media, has decided that it is useful to keep Joe Biden in the race for a little while longer. that Bernie must not win, and so despite the fact that Joe Biden has become a laughing stock, they are not going to they're not going to mention it. That one of the purported moderators of the debate, she writes, CBS News' Nora O'Donnell opened things up by asking Mr. Sanders why, in the midst of such a strong economy, Americans should look to a democratic socialist to do. Gave a stock answer about how the economy was working only for billionaires and how we would create a new system that worked for everyone else. From there, the non-Bernie players proceeded to define themselves by their lines of attack. Bloomberg took the approach most designed to irritate, invoking the recent reports that Russia has been trying to meddle in the election to aid Sanders. Vladimir Putin thinks that Donald Trump should be president, Bloomberg charged, and that's why Russia is helping you get elected, so you will lose to him. I just, the Democrats and their supporters in the media have so lost touch with reality that this is the only reason to explain why there is not a chorus of boos and groans when Bloomberg, trots out this line that, oh, Trump is Putin's puppet. Oh, and Sanders is Putin's puppet, too. This is just so absolutely ridiculous. But this is the kind of thing that these people believe, or they at least pretend to believe. It's really difficult to tell. But, again, when Joe Biden's monstrous gaffe is not mentioned by the New York Times, one really has to conclude that the fix is in, that the fix is well and truly in. Let's see what's going on in the chat here. The first comment or the second comment, all right, let's get it over with. Oh, dear. Is it as bad? Is it as bad as all that? Visionary Companion says, the attack on law and order as white supremacy and fascism has been in the liberal discourse in the U.S. since the late 60s when I was in high school. It puzzled me then. It exasperates me now. Yeah. I mean, this all seems to be, the planted axiom here is that, that everyone agrees with us. That, of course, America is a illegitimate country, has always been illegitimate. The funny thing is that in the 1960s, there were not all that many people who believed it. It was considered to be a fringe opinion. But a lot of opinions previously thought fringe are now in the mainstream. Josh Randall says KMG Stream of Consciousness Stream, or alternately KMG Live Streams of Consciousness. Yeah, I don't know whether that's entirely fair. I appreciate the joke. It's like a secret shortwave broadcast, Samadat. Okay, the lo-fi sound. All right, I'll have to do something about that. How about if I bring that microphone closer? Does that make a difference? Okay, what else we got? Fu Manchu invites Corona. Crockett and Tubbs, Miami Vice made stubble chic. Yeah, I suppose there's a lot of truth to that. Again, I guess it's a question of what one is used to. I'll give you another example. Boxer shorts. When I was a young man, I suppose well into my 30s, boxer shorts is like what? That's the sort of thing your grandfather would wear. And then suddenly, no. You want to wear boxer shorts because you don't want to wear tighty whities, do you? It's like, oh dear, am I going to have to wear boxer shorts? But all of these trends change. If you live long enough, you'll live through several iterations. I see YT comments, the sound was perfect yesterday. It's back to being a bit distorted tonight. I haven't changed the settings at all, so I cannot explain. Church of Entropy says it's a bit better, but still clipped and hollow a bit. It's like you're talking on the radio. Okay, so yes, who says that liberal arts grads can't get good jobs? I suppose the cliche is that you get your 4-year college degree, and then you find yourself with 6 figures of debt, and I don't know, you can only be hired at what, Starbucks or whatever, you know. But it turns out that there is one man who believes in young people getting good jobs, and that is Michael Bloomberg. That there's been all manner of stories about just how wonderful it is to work for Mike Bloomberg, because he's decided that quality is in its own way a quantity in its own way is a kind of quality. That is to say, I suppose if you hoover up every political operative in the country or every aspiring political operative, you'll get a kind of hive mind, a superior hive mind. There's a piece in the Spectator USA today, an anonymous piece, which may or may not be a hoax, a parody. It's very difficult to tell these days. Dear Diary, another day on Team Mike, or should I say Team Mike, spelled M-I-C. It's like a reunion around here. Half of our reporters and literally the entire back office staff are aboard the good ship Bloomberg, and we are living large. Free pizza for lunch every day that we don't have to beg for on GoFundMe. Booze flowing like water. Damn sushi. This morning when I got here, and yes, it was still technically morning, there was an omelet station. I literally haven't had it so good since prep school. Williams was a dump compared to this. Honestly, I'd have left journalism ages ago if I'd known how great life is when you're making more than 60 grand a year on top of the old trust fund. I moved to Brooklyn. My commute doesn't involve 4 trains and knife crime anymore. It's the best. And honestly, nobody even gives a shit that I'm voting for Sanders. Half the people here are too. Hell, Mitch came in with the Feel the Burn shirt yesterday and nobody batted a damn eye. I joke that now we're all used to getting free stuff. Mike's turned us into socialists. I'm going to wear a MAGA hat next week. Ooh, booze carts coming around. Back in a set. Where was I? Oh, right. Job security, perks, food, booze, drugs, a non-starvation wage, universal indolence. I'll break in and say, yes, this is the dream. That you are going to graduate with your lib arts degree and you're going to get a well-paid job right off the start, and it's going to be an important job too. You're not going to be some sort of cubicle drone. You're going to be electing the next president of the United States. Anonymous continues, and all my laid-off friends from failed digital media ventures. Lots of good things to say about this gig. All I have to do is make one weird-ass Twitter post a day, and it's golden. I'm not even expected to read the comments. So long as my posts get engagement, it's considered a win on the big board of performance stats that sits in front of the room. The big board rules. It just tracks traffic. That's it. We used to have a sentiment tracker attached, but the feedback was so overwhelmingly negative, it started treating die oligarch as a positive interaction. Shit, sometimes I dunk on my own posts using my personal alt account, at Mark Slut, if you're curious. I get to express some angst, and it makes my data-obsessed bosses happy. Let's hear it for vanity metrics. Hang on, grabbing another gimlet. That's so good. I never really appreciated the varieties of gin before this job. Great stuff. Oh, management. That is one thing to complain about, namely that it's exactly like journalism. People are constantly getting reassigned to jobs they've shown they're incapable of doing. Nobody takes responsibility for anything. The official hierarchy is only nominal. And most of the senior staff is comprised of dead-eyed psychos, alcoholics, degenerates, or some combination thereof. Plus, there's a weird sprinkling of random political people. John Delaney works here now, but nobody is sure doing what exactly, other than pull-ups. That dude is totally jacked. I'm also like 80% sure my new boss, Gigi, is actually Ghislaine Maxwell. She keeps saying weird stuff about how smooth my cheeks are and asking me to have dinner with her friends. It's all a bit much in an open plan office, to be honest, but whatevs. So long as Mad Mike keeps paying the bills, I'm on board. Oh shit, that reminds me. There is one rule here. You call him Mike, not Michael, not Mr. Bloomberg, not Sir or Mayor or any other honorific. I watched him melt the fuck down on a debate prep specialist who said Michael, and it was not pretty. He called her, well, I don't even want to write it, but let's just say it was a Middle English term for her nether regions adorned with stupid and fat. So yeah, you learn that rule pretty quick. The debate preppers are masters at it. They keep flattering him and going to their briefing books, and it doesn't make a dent, but they keep at it. Real pros, those folks. See, Mike does not listen, period. Full stop. You could tell him he was on fire, and he'd tell you to work 20% harder. And he wouldn't notice when you told him that he should screw himself 20% harder. It's kind of amazing, actually. The guy built one of the world's great fortunes seemingly through sheer indifference to the overwhelming natural hostility people feel towards him. When you think about it, it kind of owns. People are all like, we don't like you, or you're short, or you have lifeless eyes, black eyes, like a doll's eyes. And Mike just says something vaguely misogynistic and keeps on trucking and spending. You got to admire it on one level. Gotta run. The drink cart's coming around again, and I'm supposed to spray paint fuck Bloomberg on the front of the office once the sun sets. Later. Yeah, that last paragraph alludes to the hypothesis that the supposed attacks on Bloomberg offices are actually being carried out by Bloomberg supporters. But I like that word. I like that word oligarch. It's a much underused word considering the circumstances in the West today. So if nothing else, I suppose Mike's candidacy is a good thing in that he has brought public attention to the word oligarch. Now, let's go back to the New York Times. And one of its fonts of idiocy, Thomas B. Edsall. And his column is called, Does Anyone Have a Clue About How to Fight Back Against Trump's Racism? Moderates and progressives have a lot to lose by ignoring each other on this crucial question. You see, what's going on here is that, oh, Trump's a racist, Trump's a racist. It's the argument by assertion. It's just a given that Trump is a racist. And well, how do we know that Trump is a racist? Let's not have an explanation of what actually racism is, because I suppose that would be contentious. Racism essentially means a person with whom I disagree. I suppose Peter Brimelow might say, a racist is a person who is winning an argument with a liberal. But clearly he said this a long time ago, because who calls themselves a liberal anymore? It's all progressive now. So Trump is cracking down on illegal immigration, which is, according to Thomas B. Edsall, ipso facto proof that he is a racist. And Edsall, again, like other people that I've spoken of today, he trots out these studies. Okay. There are myriad studies, as I have noted, along with many others, that shows the continuing effectiveness of race and immigration as wage issues. These studies continue to appear at an alarming rate. That it doesn't seem to have occurred to Edsall that because they're professors, because a bunch of professors put their name on a publication, that does not make it in any way scientific. It's just their opinions. But of course, Trump didn't invent American racism. Efforts on the left to challenge the long history of Republican success at exploiting race and a host of ancillary issues, crime, welfare, social disorder, family breakdown, homelessness, This history includes Richard Nixon in 1968 and 1972, Ronald Reagan in 1980, George H.W. Bush in 1988, and Donald Trump in 2016. So what he's talking about then is normative in American politics. Let's see. Here's one study, The Trump Effect, an experimental investigation of the emboldening effect of racially inflammatory elite communication, published earlier this month by 4 political scientists, 4 people. They concluded, we find that exposure to racially inflammatory statements by Trump caused those with high levels of prejudice to be more likely to perceive engagement in prejudiced behavior as socially acceptable. Well, there is some truth to this, but not in the way that these academics understand. If you have a situation, like say in Canada, where everyone is saying the same thing, you're not likely to have any politicians who are going to say something different. In the last election, there was a former Conservative MP who went independent called Maxime Bernier, who started his own political party. Well, he was condemned as a racist, and in fact, Andrew Scheer actually hired Warren Kinsella, Warren Kinsella, to run a campaign that he's a racist, that Maxime Bernier is a racist. But when you have someone like Donald Trump winning election in 2016, people come to realize that they can say what they think, because apparently they have a friend in high places. Richard Nixon in 1968 ran as the law and order candidate. And I suppose at the time, there were people worried that talking about law and order meant that you were a bad person. But as Nixon demonstrated in 1968, and especially in 1972, that law and order was overwhelmingly popular. In fact, law and order is overwhelmingly popular almost everywhere, because people understand, certainly in Western countries, that what's the alternative to law and order? Anarchy? No, it's not so popular. I see that this meme has been created that Bernie Sanders is the 2020 version of the 1972 Democratic political nominee George McGovern, which I find very amusing. George McGovern was an Irish American from South Dakota who flew over Germany over 30 times as the pilot of U.S. bombers. And his campaign slogan in 1972 was "Come Home, America," which is really the same message as America First. Let's see, getting back to Edsel. If the President of the United States denigrates Muslims or Hispanics or African Americans, then anyone can. Where are the examples of Trump denigrating African Americans qua African Americans? There aren't any. But you see, he's falling back on this argument that since Trump has attacked various black people, well, that must mean, that he hates black people and that he's a racist. Oh, and now we get to the message that, white people, your day in the sun is coming to an end, but don't make a fuss about it. This part's coming up here. A forthcoming paper by Desmond King and Roger Smith, political scientists at Oxford and the University of Pennsylvania, White Protectionism in America, makes a strong case that Trump, unlike his Republican predecessors in the White House, has gone far beyond rhetoric and token gestures to substantively address the concerns of his anti-immigrant and socially conservative supporters. King Smith cataloged in great detail Trump's success putting in place policies favored by racially conservative Americans, but with a new focus on active white protection rather than simply colorblind efforts to constrain positive governmental actions. Trump has fanned the anger of many white supporters convinced that post-1970 federal policies have unjustly favored people of color. Has Thomas Edsel heard of affirmative action? Has he heard of it? Because, it's the law of the land that white people and only white people can be discriminated against. So does that give white people a reason to believe that post-1970 federal policies have unjustly favored people of color? No, of course not, because white people suck. And the very idea that the President of the United States might have a focus on active white protection, well, despite the fact that white people are still very much a majority in the United States, obviously, the job of the President of the United States is to persecute white people as much as possible and to make them understand as forcefully as need be that they're going to be a minority soon, and they just better, get ready for taking it in the neck. So how have the Republicans, or Trump especially, been able to get away with this? Well, we have yet another study, how progressives can recapture 7 deeply held American values. The authors, Simon Greer, founder of Cambridge Heath Ventures, and Richard Kallenberg, a senior fellow at the foundation, note that working class Americans do not want to be lectured about what their motivations are, and ascribing misogyny or racial animus to any group of potential voters is not a winning strategy for building a coalition. Well, that is absolutely true. But the problem is that ascribing misogyny and racial animus to one group of potential voters is the raison d'etre of the Democratic Party now, and is the raison d'etre of the elite. That white people, don't you just hate them? And I'm afraid that any attempts by Democrats or the elite to pretend that they don't hate white people, these attempts are going to fail. Because, look what happened to Mike Bloomberg. Mike Bloomberg was a famous man in America for a long time before he decided to run for president. And he was a man who likes to say what he thinks. And he had various contentious things to say about race relations in the United States. And then he runs for president, and his message is, forget everything I've said in the past. Those statements don't define me. I'm terribly ashamed of what I said in the past. Is he? It doesn't matter. Mike Bloomberg, who was formerly a Republican, came to the conclusion that obviously to have a chance of winning the Democratic nomination, one has to ascribe to a set of values, and at the top of that set of values are the maxims that minorities are wonderful, we need more of them, and that white people are horrible, we need fewer of them. But I don't know, this Edsel fellow, he just goes on for thousands and thousands of words to come to the conclusion that the most effective liberal democratic message read, America's strength comes from our ability to work together, to knit together a landscape of people from different places and of different races into one nation. For this to be a place of freedom for all, we cannot let the greedy few and the politicians they pay for turn what you look like, where you come from, or how much money you have into reasons some of us matter and others don't. It's time to stand up for each other and come together. It's time for us to pick leaders who reflect the very best of every kind of American. Together, we can make this a place where freedom is for everyone, no exceptions. Yeah, okay. In the 2016 election, Hillary Clinton was very eager to maximize her proportion of the black vote. Now, blacks in the United States, they vote as a block. But the numbers matter. The difference between, in a close election, the difference between getting 88 or 90 or 92% of the black vote means an awful lot. And so Hillary Clinton, during the Democratic convention, held a televised session with the mothers of the movement. That is to say, Michael Brown, and that no limit fella who got limited by George Zimmerman. The message this sends out to Americans is we're on the side of young thugs. And we are not on the side that believes that we should be protected from young thugs. In 1972, it was joked, and this became a meme before they were memes, that the Democrats were the party of acid, abortion, and amnesty. Well, it was somewhat unfair at the time. But the difference being, in 1972, the Democrats were saying, no, 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 we're not like that. We're patriotic Americans. Whereas in 2020, the center of gravity amongst the progressives, as now we've called them, has moved so far that it's not considered controversial for the Democratic nominee for president to kiss up to the mothers of thugs who were rightfully limited, or to demand that illegal immigrants get all the government gives, or incredibly, that male to female transsexuals in prison should get free female sanitary products. Yes, what are you going to do for transsexuals? This is a question that's been raised again and again and again at Democratic debates. And instead of answering, do you think that's a really serious problem? No, the answer was no. Here's how I'm going to, show you that I care more about transsexuals and their problems than anyone else. That is now simply the mainstream in the Democratic Party. Now, I was talking about TikTok yesterday, and I made a little joke about how I follow TikTok avidly. I don't. I use a lot of irony in my speech, and that was an attempt at a joke. I suppose it failed if people believe that I actually spend a lot of time watching TikTok. I was simply interested in it because, as I explained yesterday, apparently it's now another horrible place of cultural appropriation. I'm going to read a blog post here from someone who has thought about the TikTok problem more deeply than I have. And it's from a fellow I'll call JR. He writes, I kept hearing about TikTok from various Zoomers in my life, so I decided to check out the app for myself to see what all the fuss was about. It was a hellish experience. A short perusal of TikTok will disabuse you of the notion that Gen Z is in any way salvageable. Mass media has melted the Zoomers' brains. They are formless, personality-free goo, mere putty in the hands of, well, I won't say that part. The Zoomers' formative years of hyperstimulation have created a new sort of human, a creature with a deranged and fractured psyche who is soothed not by landscape, nor religion, nor community, but by 5-second contextless bursts of fella music and gyrating. To peer into TikTok is to peer into the maw of Satan himself. After spending hours on the platform, I can hardly recall a single TikTok clip I watched. It all runs together in a dizzying and disconnected flood of image and sound. An episode of Rick and Morty is morally redemptive art in comparison, demanding, as it were, 22 minutes worth of sustained attention. This will sound like pretentious media studies posting, but the TikTok experience is brutal and dehumanizing. The longer you stare into it, the less human you become. After 10 minutes or so, you enter a base mammalian state like a baby reaching up at the mobile hanging above its crib. You become pre-literate, pre-cognizant. Your internal personhood completely recedes and you submit to pure sensation. Scrolling through TikTok is a visceral experience of scale. There's an endless sea of dopey retard faces, craven strangers desperate for your attention, none of whom you are likely to ever see again. You are demoralized to encounter vast social trends beyond your control that you never knew even existed in your country. no ability to contain or meaningfully influence the raw id of the ocean of retards and the things they choose to mindlessly click and spread like a virus. Some teenage lisping, I won't say that part, in glitter makeup gets 100 million views each upload. The attention market's invisible hand has chosen and is chosen to cup a pair of hairless twink balls. The lone concerned citizen is but a flea against this circus of satanic excess. Another observation, it's frightening how quickly rap has become the default popular music of the big gay empire. It is so omnipresent that white Zoomers, bathed in irony, though they may be, nevertheless dance along to it. Often it often has the feeling of a hostage video. These TikToks with apple-cheeked Midwestern white teens doing loose-jointed dindu dancing to some violent mumbling about something I won't mention. There is a manic desperation in the eyes of these teens, some inchoate understanding that Babylon is crumbling around them. 13-year-old blonde girls twerking in the kitchens of their suburban McMansions dressed like street whores, soy-laden Zoomers with K-pop haircuts doing pratfalls, swaggering teenage trans dykes sharing the daily struggles of breast binding and hormone blocking, dipshits so hollowed out, devoid of personality, all they can do is speak in bite-sized memes. Is this an even uglier generation than the millennials? It seems hard to fathom such a thing, but it may well be the case. Please, for your own sanity, protect yourself and those you love from the scourge of TikTok. I suppose the popularity of TikTok shows the power of mimesis and how our society has become intensely mimetic. Other people are doing something, so I don't want to be left out. Christopher Lasch noted as far long ago as 1977 that communal styles of child rearing had resulted in children with a fierce need to fit in. I don't want to be that guy who is not part of this trend. And TikTok is a bunch of really short videos with people doing nothing in particular, and it's one after the other, after the other, after the other, and it's all supposed to be wonderful. But again, a subject that I harp on a lot is that this excess of secular democracy today. That okay, you want to be acclaimed, you want to be applauded, you want to be loved. Well, why don't you do something, worth mentioning? Why don't you display some talent, some genius? Astonish me, as the filmmaker said. No, that would be anti-democratic. That would be classist. Because why is it necessary to display positive attributes in order to be acclaimed? Everyone deserves to be acclaimed. We're all geniuses. We're all beautiful. We all need to be loved by vast audiences of people. And one can see how these values quickly foment a kind of universal idiocy, universal mental retardation, as Shiva Naipaul put it. He was writing about the Northern California of Jim Jones's time, but it's clear that this has become, indeed, universal. So I had a bunch of people asking me about, did I say something about Michael Corrin? And I thought, again, I'm going to have to put timestamps on these videos, start doing it, and go back and do the old ones. I just thought first, it's a big change, to share a forum with someone for 3 hours and then to have to carry a 2-hour show by oneself. I'm not complaining. I'm enjoying doing it, but it takes a while to get used to it. But I did talk about Michael Corrin, but this may have been on the first episode of this show, which disappeared down the memory hole for some reason. I referred to a piece in the Catholic World Report. Today, of course, is Ash Wednesday, which is a memento mori of our mortality. The cautionary tale of the capricious Michael Coren. How did a former high-profile Catholic apologist and author become a liberal Anglican deacon and the proud bearer of the LGBT flag? So, according to this article by Patrick Coffin, you might remember the name Michael Coren, the British-born Canadian journalist who used to write for some Catholic publications, including Catholic World Report. I interviewed him a time or two on the Catholic Answers Live radio show. The man had something to say, and if a bit abrasively, he said it well. Years prior, I used to read his column in the Canadian pro-life newspaper, The Interim, and caught him once in a while on CFRB radio in Toronto. I was frankly impressed by his willingness to debate third-rail issues like abortion in the falsely left-wing media sphere. Then he mentions an incident which struck people at the time as being odd and possibly highly revealing. In 1993, he did a sit-down interview for Toronto Life magazine with Cardinal Aloysius Ambrosic, the now deceased Archbishop of Toronto. Coren obviously gained His Eminence's trust, the same man who gave Coren a media award for service to the church the year before, and sat down with him under friendly pretenses. It was a setup, and Ambrosic got a shellacking. Coren seemed to take umbrage when the unguarded and unmedia-savvy prelate said some unsavory-sounding things, including calling gays in Toronto poor devils. So Michael Coren, his convert to Catholicism, he says that one of his godfathers was Lord Longford. So he becomes a very prominent Catholic in Canada and in the United States as well, writes a number of books, and then he abandons Catholicism for what they call it, the Vineyard Blessing, the Toronto Airport Church, Pentecostalism, and then he writes all these columns in the National Post elsewhere attacking Catholicism, including his response to Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ, that it was medieval. When people say things like that, they're indicating they don't know what medieval means. Medieval is not, it's not pejorative, but this is a clue that it's been said about Michael Coren that he never really knew very much about Catholicism, and I think that this could very well be true. So after attacking Catholicism for all these years, then he announces that he's Catholic again, and Catholics are right. He wrote a book with that subject on that subject, and then he leaves Catholicism to join the Anglican Church, which is a very odd thing to do. It used to be not uncommon for divorced men or women to say get married in an Anglican or Episcopal church because they were not legally able to get married in a Catholic church. That's not really a problem anymore. Something like 90% of the world's annulments come from the United States alone. It's ridiculously easy as a Catholic to get an annulment in the United States. And let's see, in a 2014 Toronto Sun column, he announced his change of heart regarding gay issues having been parachuted into clouds of new realization and so on. Beyond that, it was rather vague. Very surprised, I called him and left a message. Nothing back. He shot up another column in which he labeled the community he fled the Church of Nasty and went on a tear against his Romanist enemies, real and imagined. Catholics were now cruel, ultra-conservative fundamentalists, or otherwise the far right. And he's the victim of hate now that he's been enlightened. You get the drift. In one of these columns, or perhaps in the book that he read, I can't remember, he actually dared to suggest that the reason that homosexual Catholic priests preyed on adolescent boys was because they weren't getting enough respect from their institution. Absolutely sickening. So what's the explanation for this? His religion hopping involved reversals on several basic issues, from abortion. He's now proudly pro-choice to Islam. Yes, the same author of Hatred, Islam's War on Christianity, can go on to write an article in which he rails against Canada's Islamophobia industry. There appears to have been an economic motive. His former employer, the Sun News Network, which carried his TV show, was faltering by 2014. It went under in February 15. Gosh, around the time Corrin issued his pro-gay epistles. Seeing the writing on the wall, he attempted to join the upstart conservative rebel news platform founded by another ex-Sun News host, Ezra Levant. Corrin lasted a week there. When inter alia, he penned a National Post article attacking parents who objected to the explicit sex ed curriculum being pushed on school children by the lesbian then Premier of Ontario, Kathleen Wynne. Levant saw the lack of alignment and let him go. A cynical interpretation would say that with no other conservative media gigs left in Canada, a jobless Corrin ran mea culpas up the flagpole, hoping to snag work at a place like the state-owned Canadian Broadcasting Company, which worked, albeit not permanently, while putting maximum distance between himself and his former defenses of the natural moral law on sexuality. This is pretty much my own opinion of this. That, well, Ezra Levant was, who I've spoken about before. He's not a friend of mine, but I was rather shocked to see how he was unpersoned in Canada within about the space of a week. And any consanguinity with him or Rebel News is now thought to be death. You cannot be connected or have been connected with him in any way. That there is no opportunity for social conservatives to get a media hearing in Canada. None, zero. It simply doesn't happen. And so Michael Corrin was a man who, he was a freelance journalist. He didn't have an official position. He wrote some books. And I think that he decided that, it was time for him to graze where the grass is. Now, I had a personal run-in with Michael Corrin some years ago. It wasn't firsthand. I worked for a magazine called Alberta Report, and we published a column by Michael Corrin. And he had a bunch of columns published in the Toronto Globe and Mail, and somehow he convinced the editor-publisher of my magazine to reprint them, getting a second bite at the apple. And at one point, I said to Link Byfield, the editor-publisher, that, I thought that Corrin's stuff was boring. And, well, we stopped running it. Maybe he found out about this. But in any event, he had a protege, a young man who wanted to get into the journalism business. And so Michael Corrin managed to get him an entry-level job on a tryout at Alberta Report. And I was his editor. Now, the culture, the editorial culture at Alberta Report was, certainly when I started there, was sink or swim. Here, you're going to write this story. There wasn't a lot of guidance there. And I thought, I'm going to do everything I can, to make things easier for these people who are trying to get jobs. I explained to them, in considerable detail, what needs to be in the stories that I assigned. I gave them lists of people to interview. I even suggested leads for them. And I made it very clear to them that although our magazine had, a right-wing, socially conservative stance, that the story must be, balanced in the sense that both sides are heard. So this fellow, Corrin's protege, he wrote a story about Liberal Party changes to federal immigration policy. And he delivered the story to me, and I was absolutely appalled. Because essentially, the whole story was like a commercial for the Canadian Alliance Party, and apparently Liberals were the real racists. There was no balance in the story at all, and I had to make a call. I had to do an interview myself in order to get this story, make it acceptable, fit for publication. So a short while later, what in consecutive weeks in his Toronto Sun column, Michael Coren attacked me, although not by name, although it was easy, if you knew the facts of the case, to understand he was talking about. And what he wrote was that his protege, who was a fine-minded, diligent young fellow, produced a story, and that I said to him, I can't possibly print that. It's far too balanced. Now, reading that this is a lie, because no one in the history of words has ever said, I can't print that. It's far too balanced, unless they're twirling a handlebar mustache. And then, I don't know, about a week after that, he returned to make, another attack on me. But Michael Coren is simply not reliable. He's always been, simply a provocateur. And a man who changes, people often change their religion, but they're typically moving in one direction. Say they're moving towards more form. Say that's a typical move over time. That their religion becomes, I don't know, more formal. But Coren has just been all over the map. And, now he's assailing people for their views on homosexuality and Islam and the like, without stopping to consider that he engaged in the same thing and in a rather nasty way. But, now that he has, adopted the Canadian religion of progressivism, then this clears the slate. He has been given absolution for his sins. I always figured that Coren was going to blow up one day, and he actually did blow up several times before. But now he styles himself the Reverend Michael Coren. And in one of the headshots that he uses, he's wearing a Roman collar. Talk about laying it on thick. Okay, that today is Pink Shirt Day. Is this celebrated universally? Is it celebrated in the United States? Okay, yes, here's something from a Canadian government agency. Women and Gender Equality Canada, call it out and take a stand against bullying. Stop bullying and choose kindness, period. Pink Shirt Day. So everyone is supposed to wear a pink shirt. Well, why? Because it shows that you're against bullying. Well, why would wearing a pink shirt show that you're against bullying? Because I suppose that bullying is, it's all about sensitive young gay people being bullied. Now, doubtless, some of them are. Some of them have been. Some of them are today. But bullying is a universal phenomenon. I see here are members of a police force, the Halton Regional Police Service. And, policing doesn't seem to be very much about catching criminals these days, but enforcing the law. It's, showing how progressive you are. And there are 4 people, 2 men and 2 women, and they're all wearing pink shirts with their police badges on them. So they're a gay paramilitary force. There's 2 women, one of whom has a shaved head, because that's a perfectly normal thing for a woman to do, to shave her head. Yes, and there are thousands and thousands of these tweets. Oh, here's another one from a police officer, from several police officers. And yes, they're wearing the pink shirts with their badges on them. They see nothing unseemly about a gay paramilitary force. No, nothing at all unusual about that. There's no reason why people would be taken aback by that, perhaps even frightened of it. But I'm going to make a case for bullying here. that bullying is a non-legal form of enforcing societal values. Now, I suppose, I was bullied from time to time when I was a youth, but this is a pretty much common experience. Unlike Rod Dreher, I'm not going to bitch and moan about something that happened to me 40 or 50 years ago. Um, Here's the positive quality of bullying, that people learn how to behave without formal rules having to be imposed upon them. For instance, adult supervision. That I know this sounds crazy, but you'll have to trust me on this. That the vast amount of athletic activity when I was younger was informal. No leagues, although I did play little league baseball and I played organized soccer. But you could walk around any neighborhood and you'd find a bunch of boys playing baseball, playing football, normally touch football or flag football, playing soccer, and you would say, "Can I join your game?" And usually they'd say, "Sure," but you had to learn what the rules were, and you didn't set the rules. The rules were set before you showed up. Now, it was very amusing to witness. Occasionally, there'd be some boy who was determined that things must be done his way. And he would be told, "No, that's not how it works around here. And if you don't like it, you can buzz off." And sometimes this fellow would buzz off, and often he'd worked himself into such a pitch that he was actually weeping, which of course led to gales of laughter from everyone else. But the boys learned a lesson, and the lesson is, I'm not going to try that stunt again. And it is possible. It's been demonstrated in the past that one does not need formal rules for everything. That one does not need adult supervision for everything. One does not need to descend to litigation when there are disputes. But we live in a transactional society now. And, how is it possible for people to get together if there's not a formal charter, if there's not, a mission statement, if there's not a code of ethics and all the rest of it, Let's see. Doug Taylor asks, is that a carcinoma on the top of KMG's head? No, actually, I'll tell you what it is. It's, what would you call it? It's a kind of growth, I had one of them removed from the back of my head a few years ago. It's a cyst, it's called. I suppose that I was scratching at it. Metal Mike writes, the Breakfast Club was very accurate in its depiction of 80s high school life. Yeah, I suppose so. I like the movie. I like John Hughes. I don't really like the idea that everyone just has to smoke dope and get high in order to get along. But just the formality of the situation, and teachers calling themselves educators, very very droll, and this will be on your permanent record, and it's like, do you appreciate the seriousness of what you've done? It's like, can you just punish me and just shut up? But yeah, I suppose by the 1980s, everyone was in some sort of clique, that people were defined by their membership in one or another social grouping. The Columbine killers, they wore these trench coats, right, to show how moody, edgy they were. And they drank a soft drink that no one else drank, just in order to cream soda. That was part of the membership in their little gang, that you had to drink cream soda. And again, it's very sad to me that people have to be part of some group. It's like I want you to know, you must know this about me, that I'm a member of this group, and that is the most important thing about me. I don't think that it is. I think that people who point to membership in a group as the most important thing about them, I think that these are sad people, and yeah, the trench coat mafia. I don't think that they have much to offer. But you see, in Columbine, this pursuit of separateness, this pursuit of alienation, because that's really what it is. Well, it can turn murderous. Let's see. Ricky Bullock says last week a Somali I know was showing my TikTok, and oh dear, it is at least as retarded as KMG makes it out to be. I saw a news story regarding Somalis that a woman was robbed and brutally beaten by her Somali refugee neighbor, who also stabbed her with a screwdriver. He has been terrorizing the neighborhood for a while. All charges against him have been dropped due to his IQ of 49. This is a story from St. Louis. Now, a person with an IQ of 49, this raises the question, how can he put a shirt on without choking himself to death? But the economic argument for immigration, that, these people are the future, the saviors indeed of our economy. How is a person with a 49 IQ or a 70 IQ, for that matter, going to be the savior of our economy? People like to appeal to the old Ellis Island days. Well, things were very different then. That the West still hadn't been tamed. That America was a country still in the making. Canada, a country still in the making. Those days are long over. I often imagine, someone showing up before an immigration officer at Ellis Island, and the officer asks him, "So why do you think we should let you in? What do you have to offer?" And so the immigrant says, "I have strong back." And the immigration officer says, "Well, that's good. We need strong backs in this country." Well, we don't really need all that many strong backs. Of course, the rule in the Ellis Island days was root, hog, or die. You worked if you could find work. If you didn't, then you starved. A lot of immigrants went home in those days because they couldn't make it in the new world. But now, I guess the question we would ask now is, what drove this immigrant to do what he did? How did we fail him? And what changes must be made so that this doesn't happen again? I just wonder how long this fellow is going to be alive for. The woman who was attacked said that she feels that she has been failed by the system, and she believes there needs to be a change. This is going to happen again. It's my number one priority that it doesn't. Well, you see, the very act that this woman has done, that she has complained publicly about a vicious attack from an immigrant, you see, this is playing right into Trump's hands, that this is the spirit of white protectionism. Because what right does this woman have to believe that she shouldn't be terrorized by a low IQ immigrant? I mean, that's very, old-fashioned thinking. And, certainly the people running for the Democratic nomination. Metal Mike says, I subscribe to the American Conservative magazine. What other print magazines do you recommend? I don't know. There's Chronicles. Paul Gottfried is editing that now. It's funny. I made a prediction roughly I guess in the year 2000, that by 2010, all print magazines, that is to say that magazines that are dependent on printed words rather than pictures, magazines like Vanity Fair and Architecture Digest and Vogue, they've got words in them, but they're mostly about pictures, features, and ads. But my prediction was that 4 print magazines would go out of business in 1 decade by 2010. Now, several of these magazines are still around, but they're all run by foundations now, because it has been determined that no, you can't make money off the printed word anymore. You hear people talking about, how there can be a revival of newspapers, and I don't think that that's possible. The critic Bill Wyman, not to be confused with the former Rolling Stones bassist Bill Wyman, as he's pointed out, this is my real name, and the Rolling Stones Bill Wyman, he made that name up. I believe his real name is Perks. But he asked the question, if newspapers were free, would anyone actually read them? Well, I have some experience with that. The McDonald's that was about a quarter mile from where I used to live up until a couple of years ago, they used to put out copies of the Victoria Times Colonist, which is our daily newspaper here. And apart from old people, nobody here, take a free newspaper. No one was interested. Free copies of the Victoria Times Colonist get dumped at the front door of my apartment building on a regular basis. I don't know, there's about 5 of them. And I see them a day later or 2 days later, and no one has bothered to pick up a copy of a free newspaper. So I think that it's too late for them. There was a piece by Steve Saylor on Babe Ruth. And, is he the greatest of all time in baseball? Well, I think he is. And I guess Steve Saylor agrees with me. I remember having a conversation with Colby Kosh, who I used to work with years ago, before he became the media star that he is today. And he said that the magazine that we worked for had hired someone who was a liberal. And I said, liberal, well, what do you mean by that? And he said, okay, I'll give you an example. He said, who's the greatest baseball player of all time? I said, that's easy, Babe Ruth. And he said, that would be my choice too. But he answered, Hank Aaron. And I said, Hank Aaron, he was a great ball player, but I don't know that he'd be in my top 10. But you see, Hank Aaron must be a better baseball player than Babe Ruth because, well, I could point out that besides his 714 home runs and his other astounding stats, Babe Ruth was a pitcher before he was made a full-time hitter, and he won 94 games as a pitcher, which is very impressive. Steve Saylor writes, I recently unfairly baited the great baseball statistics thinker Bill James into responding at vast length to one of my snarky tweets, which got me thinking about what we could learn from baseball history, but how the media often gets the narrative wrong. The intellectual rigor of baseball discourse, a formerly overly sentimental field, has improved dramatically over my lifetime. Unfortunately, discussion of many other more important subjects, such as immigration policy, has gotten schmaltzier. You might think, for example, that the success of new baseball stats suggests we should use Moneyball techniques to pick the best immigrants, the talented few whose presence will most benefit existing Americans out of the 7 billion non-Americans, in much the same way that sports teams today carefully draft the most promising young athletes. And indeed, after 3 years in office, the Trump administration has finally managed to get into effect this week a new, improved public charge rule to better screen out immigrants likely to wind up on welfare. But this seemingly simple concept of America trying to more intelligently select promising immigrants and keep out of ill-omened immigrants has outraged and baffled the great and the good. Baseball stats have become a safe space for white guys who like to engage in acts of pattern recognition ever since a boiler room attendant named Bill James. Bill James began revolutionizing the study of baseball stats with his first self-published baseball abstract in 1975. Over the past 45 years, the progress in baseball analysis has been testimony to the value of intellectual freedom. There has been a revolution among baseball intellectuals because nobody has gotten canceled for saying something deemed immoral. The old order was overthrown because mirabile dictu, they lost a long series of arguments and eventually jobs. Mr. James, for example, was hired by the Boston Red Sox front office, from which he recently retired after 17 years and 4 world championships. On the other hand, as with any historic change, the victors are likely to exaggerate the backwardness of the defeated. Hence, I like to tweak advocates of the triumphant advanced analytics, or sabermetrics, by pointing out that many of their findings about who were the best baseball players in history were anticipated generations ago by little boys. So I tweeted that the glass hadn't been half empty, it had been half full. Sabermetricians congratulate themselves for noticing in retrospect what fans in the stands noticed at the time. E.g., advanced analytics has determined that the greatest baseball player of all time was Babe Ruth, who was also the most popular player ever. I went on to point out that the 8 highest achieving careers, according to the composite wins above replacement metric, for estimating the best all-round players at the Popular Baseball Reference website, belong to Ruth, Walter Johnson, Cy Young, Barry Bonds, Willie Mays, Ty Cobb, Hank Aaron, and Roger Clemens, all of whom were extremely famous during their career among fans who had never heard of WAR or James' own rival composite statistic, win shares. You know, I guess the old guys, the old baseball guys, they still dominate the commentary. For instance, the 2 fellows who give the play-by-play and the color for the Toronto Blue Jays games, they just, I find them saying infuriating things that, oh, yes, the Jays are trying to stage a rally here, and, oh, yes, he's hit a home run. But no, it would have been better for him, just to get a hit. Got to keep the line going rather than clear the bases. There is literally nothing better than hitting a home run when you're at that. That is, by definition, the best. But these people, they hang on to these, ideas like keeping the line going. Anyway, Saylor continues. Oh, I wanted to say something about, he mentions Mickey Mantle, that Mickey Mantle was, all the young boys thought Mickey Mantle was the best. I certainly thought so too. It wasn't, of course, simply because he was the best ball player of his generation, I would say, but like Babe Ruth, in a way, he was bigger than the game. Mickey Mantle had this swagger, just like Babe Ruth did. And, there's all these tales about Babe Ruth supposedly, eating 100 hot dogs, that sort of thing. We're really into Paul Bunyan territory here. But with Mickey Mantle, I guess the tales would be about, how many scotches he drank or how many cocktail waitresses he picked up. I found it very sad that in the last years of Mickey Mantle's life, he'd go on the talk shows, and there was all this talk about, how miserable his life had been. And, I didn't believe him. I understand, I suppose that he died sooner than he wanted to, or that his fans wanted him to. But the great Dr. Samuel Johnson said that no man is a hypocrite in his pleasures. And Mickey Mantle liked to drink, he liked to eat steak, and he liked to bed women. And, it's not as if anyone was forcing his hand. Saylor continues, Bill James avoided creating an all-around statistic for rank ordering all the players in baseball until 2002 due to the inherent difficulties in doing it right, long feeling that it was more useful to answer many small questions well than one big question badly. Even today, there are multiple versions of WAR that mostly but not always agree. So caution is advised in thinking about these new numbers. But people love using all-round statistics like WAR and win shares to determine who is better than most. I'm reminded of Charles Murray's reassurance in his new book of social science, Stats, Human Diversity, that nothing we learn will justify rank ordering human groups from superior to inferior. The bundles of qualities that make us human are far too complicated for that. But judging by the popularity of the new's baseball stats for ranking who is best, males love ranking. One reason so many intellectuals go berserk with rage over Murray's publication of IQ statistics is because they recognize that, limited as IQ is, it's the closest thing to an all-round statistic for rank ordering that the social sciences have. Well, you can see how, if you go to a site, like a fan site, like Bluebird Banter, which covers the Toronto Blue Jays, there's a lot of sabermetrics there. And people will say, things like, I guess, I just learned about OPS. Now I have to learn all these other things. Well, the advantage of, people say, oh, sabermetrics ruining the game, turning it into a sport for nerds. Well, baseball's always kind of been a sport for nerds. People would, actually, fill out what was happening during the game on little cards, people reading box scores in the newspaper, people looking at top 10 lists of batting average and the like. So in a way, sabermetrics is nothing new, but see, it has the advantage of giving writers the ability to write about something which is actually quantitative. Instead of saying, oh, he plays the game the right way, or a baseball player who's on a hot streak. So how do you explain your hot streak? And they say mind-numbing things like, I'm just seeing the ball really good, stuff like that. We have the ability now to see how different players react in all manner of situations. And so sports writing, until fairly recently, was our guys. Don't you love our guys? Our guys are the best. And, someone's fallen into a slump, but don't worry, he'll come out of it. I suppose, sabermetrics has been useful in all sorts of ways, one of which is that you don't expect players to get better as they get older, certainly after a certain age. Players are usually their best by the late 20s. And when players in their 30s get significantly better, that's a cue that something nefarious is going on. And I'm not talking about, these rare cases of pitchers deciding to throw knuckleballs or something like that, because, we're talking about a handful of people. But someone who was hitting, 15 home runs a year, he starts hitting, 30, 35. That sort of thing. Well, you can almost be certain that they're juicing. Saylor writes, the creation of these new synthetic statistics unveiled a paradox. Most of the great careers in baseball history had already been obvious to observers. In fact, the highest ranked player whose career has been rescued from obscurity by the newer statistics is likely workhorse pitcher Bert Blyleven at number 40 in WAR. Meanwhile, the most famous player who doesn't rank high in WAR is Joe DiMaggio at only number 68. Why don't the new numbers show DiMaggio as being as great as the man in the street, Marilyn Monroe, and Simon and Garfunkel all believed? Joltin' Joe played in only 13 major league seasons instead of the 20 or more a player of his caliber could be expected to enjoy due to a late start, war, and early retirement. Bill James responded to my Babe Ruth sally by tweeting, but that's not something that anybody ever claimed to have discovered. That was accepted truth, and we acknowledged it without controversy. What was discovered by our field was more along the lines of, we think that Larry Doby was actually more valuable than Hack Wilson. Doby was the Jackie Robinson of the American League, the first black in the younger circuit who was an all-star from 1949 to 1955, so he wasn't totally underrated. Hack Wilson was a slugger semi-famous for setting the single-season record in 1930 with 191 runs batted in before drinking himself out of the National League. Now, I'm reminded that the baseball season is going to start in about a month, and shortly after that, we will be hearing about Jackie Robinson. because apparently according to Major League Baseball, Jackie Robinson was the greatest player in baseball history. That Jackie Robinson's number has been banned by use forever by all teams. That it's Jackie Robinson all the time. Now, Jackie Robinson was a great baseball player. He's in the Hall of Fame, but he was no Babe Ruth. And the only reason that we hear incessantly about Jackie Robinson is because he's the man who broke the color barrier, and so baseball wants to get on the right side of the civil rights story. So Steve Saylor continues, my impression is that Bill James is underrating his movement's accomplishment in securing Babe Ruth's reputation. I recollect that the condescending opinion of old-time baseball intellectuals in the 1960s was often, well, sure, ill-read fans think Ruth was the greatest because he hit a lot of vulgar home runs, but the real aficionados know that Ty Cobb's record batting average, the most prestigious statistic, of .366, shows that he was better than Ruth with his measly .342. Again, I suppose there's no arguing with people like that. Oh, yeah, Babe Ruth hits a lot of home runs. And supposedly the story goes that Ty Cobb could have hit home runs if he wanted to. Well, why didn't he? Because there is literally nothing that you can do at the plate that's better than hitting a home run. As late as 1974, Robert Creamer's biography, Babe, needed to emphasize that the more obscure slugging average proved Ruth's supremacy. Today, however, 45 years into the era introduced by James, few doubt Ruth's superiority over Cobb. But that raises the question, why did regular fans rightly see Ruth as the greatest ball player way back in the statistical dark ages? As Yogi Berra said, you can observe a lot just by watching. If you watched a lot of games, Ruth's value at helping his team win was hard to miss. On the other hand, if you respected the reputable baseball stats of the time, Ruth seemed meretricious. According to, as statistics professor Andrew Gelman wrote, responding to a comment by some humanist type who was yammering on about how there are all sorts of truths that aren't in the numbers, James pointed out that the alternative to good statistics is not no statistics, it's bad statistics. People who argue against statistical reasoning often end up backing their arguments with whatever numbers they have at their command. We can go back in baseball history and find out, reconstruct games. Every single thing that happened in a baseball game. Once again, this is a sport that really lends itself to intensive statistical analysis. Steve Saylor says the traditional batting average isn't a bad statistic. It's particularly good for tracking whether a player is streaking or slumping, but it became overly enshrined in baseball lore in the 19th century and became less relevant after Babe Ruth introduced home run slugging as a viable strategic alternative to line drive hitting in 1919. Bill James then followed up with a 6,800-word response on his website titled 3 Looks at the MVPs. Now, George Will is one of America's most famous baseball fans. He's written a lot about baseball. He wrote a book about baseball. And George Will becoming one of the leaders of the conservatives, I can't say that I'm surprised because George Will is of the cosmic slop theory of baseball, rather like the late A. Bartlett Giamatti. I was absolutely infuriated reading George Will on baseball because he denigrated Ted Williams, saying that Ted Williams was a selfish player. How was Ted Williams selfish? Because he wouldn't swing outside of the strike zone. There's a limit to how much any baseball player can accomplish. It's not a sport like hockey, say, where the idea is you get the puck to Bobby Orr or to Wayne Gretzky, and then amazing things will happen. Or football, just give Joe Montana the ball and he'll win the game. Or basketball, get the ball to Michael Jordan and we'll win. There's a limit to how much each baseball player can accomplish, any single baseball player. I'm reminded of that. Barry Bonds wasn't a great player. Why? Because he never won the big game, never won a World Series, leave aside the juicing. Well, if you look at the playoff series where his team was ousted, Barry Bonds put up astounding, superhuman stats. You couldn't expect, you couldn't even imagine that anyone in a baseball series, playoff series, could play as well as Barry Bonds, but he was only one man. So, yes, he talks about Mickey Mantle, that one year he only drove in 97 runs. Was he choking in the clutch? No, pitchers were terrified of his power. He led the American League in homers for the third time in 4 seasons, so they walked him 129 times, 30 more bases on balls than Jensen's runner-up total. Mantle thus led the league with 127 runs scored versus only 83 for the MVP winner, Jensen. Again, the old-time baseball guys, they still tend to sneer at walks. Well, you get 27 outs in baseball, and what you don't want to do is give up outs. And, getting a base on balls is almost as good as getting a hit, but more crucially, you have not made an out. So I wanted to finish up today with a little short discussion of, national culture. That I was on Twitter last night talking about, what it means to be a Canadian or what it means to be an American. As I said before, I could fake being an American, but that would be cheating. I wasn't born in the United States. I didn't grow up there, and there is just so much to actually being there, particularly in, formative periods in your life. But if I was to, tell a story that would indicate, what being Canadian means to me, I'll pick this one. That I guess 10 years ago, I was taking a trip up island and stopped in this city called Courtenay and went to a supermarket there, part of a local chain. And so I was going to have a barbecue later that day. So I bought things for that, and I was looking for cheese. Cheese is incredibly expensive in my country. I don't know whether Americans know this. Those that live near the border know this. But particularly on the weekends, Canadians cross the American border in large numbers in order to stock up on milk, cheese, dairy products, because it's run in this country by a cartel. And cheese is actually more expensive than pork, which is astounding when you think of it, because, of course, a hog can be slaughtered but once, whereas a cow will give milk for many years. But I digress. I'd gotten fond of this Danish cheese called Rosenborg, I think, and which came in a cardboard box. And typically, it was not sold with the other cheeses. It had its own display somewhere in the store. So I searched the store, couldn't find it. And I went up to the deli counter, and there was a young woman there. I would say that she was 15 or 16 years old, and she was clearly a summer hire, a temporary hire. And I explained, what I was looking for, and she said, I'd never heard of it. I don't know if we have that. So I said, okay, and I walked away. And about 5 minutes later, she came running up to me with the box of what I was looking for. And she said, is this what you wanted? And I felt this great wave of emotion swelling in me. I thought, my people, because there was nothing transactional in this, that she had nothing to gain from it, that she did it solely out of, kindness, from the attitude of, I want to help you. And that's how I would, define my people. In any event, I'm going to wrap up the show now. I should mention that tomorrow's Theater Thursday, and we are going to be discussing Maurice Pialat's Under the Son of Satan. And on Friday, we are discussing Flannery O'Connor's novel about religion, and it's called Wise Blood. John Huston made a pretty good movie from it. I'd like to thank you all for tuning in. I will be back tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you want to support the show, my PayPal account is attached to the email Kevin_Grace at hotmail.com. Once again, thank you and good night.